Welcome to the Texas Tracks and Taps podcast. I'm Coy.
I'm Graham.
I'm John.
Thanks for joining us. Literally, we are together, so you're joining all of us in one location. You may be in a different location, probably are. It'd be weird if you were here. But no, this is the first time that we've all been able to get together to record in one spot. This is a real background behind us. But we are at Turning Point in Bedford, Texas, and one of our favorite breweries to come to. And they were nice enough to let us use their event space, which is called the Rustic. That is the old tap room before they expanded to next door, which is the large main tap room that they have now. But they still have this for private events, and we are their private event today. And it's good to see you guys not on Zoom, and we're just doing this, face to face, so to speak.
Nice to meet you, Coy. Nice to meet you, Graham.
Hey, man.
We've
Yeah,
never
it's
met
good to see your
person,
face
but
in
this is
person.
as we've said before, Graham and I go back about 20 years, and John and I live like a couple streets down from each other. So we've all met in person, but this is the first time we've done something like this in person. So we're looking forward to it. Today's episode is we're calling it the Bottleshare episode, where we're going to be more beer forward. We're going to talk more about our beer journeys than our musical journeys, but we're going to touch on music too, because we got some things we have to do, like follow up on John's assignment that we gave him of checking out old 97s. John, how did that go?
Man, I think I said this the last time you guys gave me homework, and I actually enjoyed this homework, but I really love this process. Like, discovering new music is really what fuels me, like just listening to new stuff. And I had heard of the old 97s, knew a couple of their songs just kind of through the years, but really did a deep dive. So I took my homework serious, guys, and I listened to quite a bit of their collections or their catalog. And I started, Coy, where you told me to start, which was the album Too Far to Carry, right? Want to make sure I get that right.
Yeah, nailed it.
Put out in 1997, fantastic album. And it's completely the type of music that's in my wheelhouse. Like, I don't know if they like to go by all country. I did see an article that they do not like the term Americana music, but it's, to me, it's rock and roll.
Yeah.
And that's what is the core of my listening these days. So I really enjoyed it quite a bit. And so I didn't stop there. I actually listened to 3 other albums. I listened to another one called Fight Songs. Since it's the holiday time right now, I'm sure you see the lights behind us. I listened to their 2018 release, which was Love the Holidays. And then I wanted to get a good cross section of kind of older old 97s and newer old 97s. And so I listened to American Primitive, which came out earlier this year. And man, all of those albums were just legit. Like, they were just solid rock albums. There was one particular song off of Too Far to Care that I really loved, and I actually was listening to it on the way over. I've listened to it probably like about 10 to 15 times already, but it's called Time Bomb. And
Oh, yeah.
you guys know that one? It was kind of interesting. Whenever you take on a project like this, you don't know really what's a hit versus what's not a hit. And so Time Bomb was just a great song. There was another one called Nightclub that I really dug. Barrier Reef was another one that I really liked. And then the holiday songs were just fantastic for this time of year.
John loves his Christmas music.
Yes.
We all know that.
Dude, yes.
But it is great. It's a really good Christmas album. A lot of originals on there. Boy, and I didn't even know it existed until our last doing research for our last episode. Not our last
COVID.
Yeah, our last episode, Christmas episode, and we discovered that. So I've been listening to that too. It's really good. Also, I was listening to American Primitive on the way over because I hadn't really given that much of a listen myself, and it is really good. And you picked really good albums. The ones you went with and listened to and dove into were good ones. That one is actually, I would say, it harkens back to their earlier stuff, and that style. So yeah, really, really good.
What about live, guys? Like, I was really disappointed when I looked up to see if they're playing. They've got a tour coming out, but nothing local here. How are they as a live band? Like,
So that's when I think I became a super fan of theirs. Like, I always had heard their stuff, just being from around here, and I liked it. And he was like, "That's a great song." But yeah, Time Bomb live versus Time Bomb recording, even though it's a great recording, it's just the energy they bring, and then energy they get from the crowd, and you just see it feed off each other.
Yeah.
They are hometown favorites. They are beloved. And it's really cool. Like they're just a part of the musical landscape since, the late 90s. And you really get that feeling. There's still a huge appreciation. These guys are definitely still a big deal locally, but also all over. Like to your point, they're starting off a tour and they're going to start on the West Coast and hit, but they'll end up hitting everywhere because there's still an appetite to see old 97s.
Yeah.
And we've talked about how they were in that Vince Vaughn movie because he was such a big fan. So yeah, their reach is far and wide, but when you see them in Dallas or close to Dallas or in Texas, it's a whole nother ballgame, I feel like.
Yeah, they'll definitely be adding some local dates and we'll definitely go check them out. Yeah, sure. Yeah. So other than old 97s, what are you guys listening to right now? What's on your playlist?
I can go first. So it's funny because this episode took me back to when I started really getting into beer, which was about the same time that I was really heavily into emo, and all those albums are turning 20, 25 years old now that I was really into. So those have been popping back up, and I've been re-listening to, Jimmy Eat World and Taking Back Sunday and Fall Out Boy, things like that. But there are some new, like a new wave, like they're almost calling it like post emo, but they're that kind of hardcore post punk sound, but modern that we were getting, back then. So these guys are touring with, the acts that we knew 20 years ago that are still touring. And so they're like opening for them, getting some exposure, but they're playing all over. I was looking up tour dates for some of these. They're like all in Europe right now. So they're huge everywhere. But the ones I've really been listening to a lot lately is Hot Mulligan, the Maine, and Stand Atlantic. And that's the Maine, like the state, Maine. But the one I'm going to really feature as far as like a whole album of theirs, like definitely check out those artists. But Bill Murray, not the actor, Bilmuri, he has an album called American Motorsports. And it is like that, hardcore emo style, but also throws in some country, twangy acoustic guitars, sometimes some twangy lead, sometimes saxophone, solos in several songs on an album, not just one, but great stuff. It's kind of tongue in cheek, especially if you watch the video for the song I'm going to recommend, which is, I know it's Thick Boy in parentheses, but it's Better Hell, Thick Boy in parentheses. That's ThiccBoi. But he is Johnny Frank, Franck, might be Frank, I don't know. But he was known as the clean vocalist and rhythm guitar player for Action, which is one of those early 2000s bands. So he's just doing this new thing, and it's entertaining. Like I said, kind of tongue in cheek, but they bring some pretty strong dank riffs, is what he would call them. But also you get some country feel. But yeah, if you watch the video for Better Hell, it's just him mowing the lawn, looking like every dad that I know, with his AirPods in, listening to that song. But every once in a while, he'll just look at the camera and like do like a power crouch and like just bust out these stage moves while he's mowing. And it's fantastic. He's great sense of humor. But yeah, that's what I've been listening to. It's been nostalgic and yet also kind of like modern. So I've enjoyed it quite a bit.
Yeah, Bill Murray. You introduced him to me, and with the video of that song.
That's how you need
to
start out.
It's hilarious. So yeah, y'all just definitely need to go check that out. And unfortunately, they were in town about a month ago, and we realized it like the day after. I don't know how we missed it, but it would have been a fun show. I did hear a lot of good things online about it. So next time, we'll definitely go check out Bill Murray live. So yeah, I'm gonna start with kind of local acts, since we do have the Texas local focus here at Texas Tracks and Taps. And locally, some of the artists I've been listening to, Vincent Neil Emerson is about to release a new album, and he's put out a couple of tracks off of that. A Rodeo Clown and Big Wheels, great, like just throwback kind of like 70s style country, and I love it. It's really good. I've seen him play live a couple times, and he's really, really good live as well. Trauma Ray, which they're a shoegaze act from Fort Worth. Just, noisy post rock kind of stuff that I tend to like and get into. And that record was just really good. Probably my favorite local record of 2024. Not not counting Leon's as a local record because he's way beyond that at this point. Outside of that, Illiterate Light is a band I've been listening to a lot. They put out an album a couple months ago. They I'd known them before this album that they just put out. Their stuff before that, though, was kind of just more your standard like indie rock fare. But this album, to me, kind of stood out when I started listening to it. It had a very much like a '90s, mid '90s like alt rock kind of vibe to it that I really dug. So I'm enjoying that a lot. Johnny Blue Skies, otherwise known as Sturgill Simpson. I mean, that album's just fantastic. I mean, everything he does is pretty much gold. So yeah, I've been enjoying that one a lot as well. And then the new Cure album, which to me is ranks top three in their catalog of albums easily. It's just I'm blown away by how, at their age, at their stage in their career, being able to put something out as high quality as that is fantastic, and I love it.
This comes out before Christmas so that Santa knows I want that.
Right.
We all-
We all do.
Yes.
Yes. And then, one thing I kind of tend to do, I don't know if you guys ever do this, but sometimes there's bands like in my past, in my history, like from when I was a teenager in my 20s that I kind of got really into. But then over the years, you kind of drift away from them and you're not really, listening to them that much. But you'll hear a song, like in this instance, it was some came up in my release radar on Spotify because they recently put out like some acoustic versions of some of their older hits. But yeah, I like to sometimes just go back and dive back into those artists, that I was into back in the day. And the one I've been doing that with recently is Toad the Wet Sprocket. To me, really great, quintessential 90s band, I think, not their first album, but their third album was kind of their breakthrough record. It's called Fear, and that has the track All I Want, which that's their biggest hit, I would say, for sure, and the one that probably the most people know. And it's a great song. Still love that. And there's some other good songs on that album. But my favorite album of theirs has always been their fourth, which is called Dulcinea. And that's got the singles Something's Always Wrong. That was a pretty big hit, probably second biggest hit for them. And Fall Down was the other single off of that, also a great song. But there's a couple of songs on there that are standouts to me, even above those ones, and that's Fly from Heaven and Crowing. They just got just great melodies, a lot of great instrumentation, and just I like his lyrics, and his lyrics resonate with me a lot. So been enjoying, diving back into Toad the Wet Sprocket.
Yeah, and Toad, lead singer, I forget his name, but he's got a fantastic voice. Like
Glenn something.
Yeah,
His last name's escaping me, but it's Glenn something.
Yeah.
Glenn
Glenn
Phillips.
Phillips. Yeah. He's got an amazing voice.
Yeah.
They've got actually a lot of songs that are fantastic. So, well, guys, I'm a little bit more boring, and I think you know that on the religious scale of 1 to 10, I'm a 1, low. But when it comes to Christmas, I'm a freak. I just absolutely love Christmas music, and the weirder the Christmas music, the better. But basically, from Thanksgiving till New Year's, that's all I spend at my house. And so I'm deep into the throes of Christmas music right now. And this morning was listening to a little Johnny Cash Christmas. He actually has a couple of different Christmas albums out, and I forget the name of the one that I was actually listening to. But the last one I spun today was Christmas Rap. That's RAP, not WRAP. And although the song became famous from, I think it was an MTV album with Keith Haring's artwork on the front, Christmas in Hollis is on Christmas Rap as well. It's the first track on that LP. So I was listening to that. And I think the second song on there was from MC Light. So it's just old school 1980s rap that kind of brings back a lot of memories of middle school for me. But I've been listening to just nonstop Christmas music outside of old 97s when I'm in the car, that, doing my homework. But that's pretty much all I've been listening to is Christmas music for the past few weeks. So.
Man, that's kind of wild. Like Johnny Cash is not someone that I relate to like Christmas music. I didn't even know he had Christmas albums. I love Johnny Cash, but you'll have to share those with me because I want to check those out for sure. I've not gotten into his Christmas catalog.
He's got a lot of traditional. I think he's got like 2 traditional Christmas song albums, and then he's got one that's like all hymns. And I think that was the one I was listening to this morning. And he's got a great voice, but it doesn't matter what he sings. But yeah, I was listening to that this morning, and then there was a couple other country artists on that LP as well. But
Check that out. Definitely.
Very cool. Well, I think we're going to transition away from music to be more beer forward, like we promised we would be, even though we started with kind of talking music, but that's okay. So again, we're at Turning Point, beer in Bedford. I will go ahead and say what I'm enjoying. I'm almost done, Graham. I know you just finished, so we got to get to talking beer so we can maybe get some more beer in these glasses.
Yeah.
But I am drinking Smash Piece, and it's Citra hops. And I was telling John, Smash is a beer term, single malt and single hop. So they only use one malt, one hop. And so it's very specific style. Usually you get multiple ingredients, but they just hone in and get the best that they can out of those single ingredients. And this one's really tasty. It's more of a West Coast IPA than I think what they're known for, which is their hazies, which we'll talk about definitely as we go on in this show. But Graham, what did you just finish drinking?
So I just had Primo, which is a hazy, kind of a lighter. A lot of their hazies tend to be like a little higher ABV, in the 7 to 9% range and beyond, if they're, triples and things like that. This is more of kind of a sessionable hazy IPA. Not sure what hops they use or anything like that, but it's just very light, very refreshing in terms of a hazy. And yeah, I mean, just like everything they do, it's on point and really tasty. Yeah.
well, and this is my first time trying this beer, but it is called Bock, or should I go Bock? It is a Bock beer, German Bock beer. Fine taste to it. I am a German beer freak. I love anything German. And so, yeah, it's actually I think for a German beer, quite mild, very bocky, I guess would be the term, but delicious first time trying it. So
Nice.
Yep. Thank you,
Yeah.
Turning Point. It's
Yeah.
delicious.
Thanks again.
Yeah. Can't go wrong here. It's all good.
So I think to start talking about our beer journeys, we got to start with our first exposures to beer, which I think me and Graham were pretty similar. I think John, even your background's kind of similar on this, but my first exposure to beer was my dad, watching my dad drink beer. I think he keyed in that I was watching him, probably saw the gears turning in my head of what he was drinking and why that was like, special dad drink that no one else drank in the house.
Right.
But he just kind of keyed in on it and just real casually, hey, you want to try it? And I was like, yeah, sure. It's good enough for you. It's good enough for me, Dad. 7-year-old me, and I take one sip of his Miller Lite, and I was like, that is the worst thing ever. Why do you drink it? That's terrible. And he's like, that's right. Don't forget it. And like, don't drink it, basically. And so it was this great, like, my exposure to beer was like, I'm never going to drink beer again, which is really ironic when you get to know me.
When you look at your Untappd,
You met me
unique
anytime after I turned 20 or almost 21. But yeah, we'll get to my Untappd later. That kid is not on Untappd. But no, it worked really well. I think my dad was pretty brilliant exposing me that way to it, knowing that, it's not built for children's taste buds. It's certainly not built for their brain cells. But yeah, well, there's rules for a reason. But yeah, so I was pretty turned off on it. It worked all the way through high school. I was at parties where beer was available, and there was peer pressure to, hey, just drink it. It's just beer, blah blah. And I'm just like, no, I mean, I would if I liked it, but I don't. I'm not going to do it. And I mean, I was a little bit of a rule follower in straight edge, but that was coming into play too. But it's just that I did not think I was going to like it, so I didn't. And I really didn't like beer until, like I said, I got closer to 21. I'm a December birthday, so all my friends turned 21 before me. And then as we were getting closer and closer, I got a little bit more exposure to beer. The first one I would say I really honed in on and liked was a Bock. That's pretty easy to find in Texas at that time and today, but that's Shiner.
Right.
So I was like, okay, all right. And so I kind of like gravitated towards that first. And then once I turned 21, there's a downtown Fort Worth institution called Flying Saucer, still there today, but in a different location. But back when it was at the old firehouse, I went there, and that's where I discovered beers from around the world. Really got into German style beers, German Hefeweizens, things like that. but liked Belgian ales. In fact, Chimay was a beer that I brought to share with you guys. We already pre-gamed it and drank it, so and I accidentally threw away the bottle. So but we enjoyed that. It was a good one. I definitely was the guy that would show up to a house party with a bottle of Chimay, and everyone was like, "What?" Like everyone else is, drinking Bud Light or Bud Ice, and but then they're like, "Oh, this is good," So I kind of was exposing my friends to better beers. But back then, it was more imports and domestics. There were microbrews, but they all were on the import side of the menu, even though they came from like San Francisco or something. So that's kind of how in those early 2000s, and when I was coming of drinking age, that was the landscape. So I think Graham, was that something similar for you?
Yeah, definitely somewhat similar. Now, my parents didn't ever drink it all in front of me. Interestingly enough, I mean, once I became of drinking age and started showing an interest in beer, my dad would, ask me to go out, hang out, and have a beer with him. So I don't know if he was drinking back then and just didn't do it in front of me, or just didn't drink. Probably the latter, I think. But I don't know if that was something my mom was kind of like, hey, we're not going to drink beer. I don't know. I don't know how all that went down, but yeah, I was never exposed to it really, or anybody who drank it as a young kid. It did kind of always kind of, to me, kind of hold a mystique, and like I'm mysteriousness, I guess because I didn't have anybody drinking it in front of me until like the first really, adult that I saw drink, and in front of me was my youth pastor. Yeah, so he got hired. I started going to this Presbyterian church, and they were looking for a youth pastor, and he came down and he preached a sermon kind of when he was going through the interview process, to see if they wanted to hire him. And he preached a sermon, and I couldn't tell you what the actual like message of it was, but all I remember is he mentioned Soundgarden, and I can't remember if it was Nirvana or Pearl Jam. I think it was Soundgarden and Pearl Jam were both mentioned in his sermon. And from that point on, it was like, this guy's cool. I want to get to know him better. I hope they hire him. Thankfully, they did. And then we started, I started going obviously to the youth group and seeing him there. But we would hang out, one on one sometimes. And I'd get invited over to his house for dinner with him and his family. And, he'd have a Tecate, or he liked the Mexican lagers or Dos Equis or something like that. Typically was what he would drink. And so that was my first exposure to someone really drinking alcohol in front of me, but doing it responsibly. Like he wasn't a lush, and you know, wouldn't drink and drive or anything like that, obviously. So that was to me, a good example of you can enjoy these good things and do it and do it responsibly. So yeah, but then, from there, like, the first beer that I ever had was probably 18 years old. I was working at a cafe, kind of an indie cafe over on West 7th, and they had a Christmas party, and boss like bought beer or whatever for everyone to enjoy, and unfortunately it was Bud Ice, which you mentioned just a sec ago, but I would not recommend that as
Can
your
you
first
even
beer.
find a Bud Ice now?
It does not exist
Maybe
anymore.
some
Thank
have been
God.
cellared
Yeah.
in aging.
Let's hope not. But yeah, it was awful. So I was not really like, oh yeah, I want to drink more of that definitely right away. But then I moved on from that cafe, and I started working at a coffee bar that was actually across the street called Four Star Coffee Bar, and met some people there that were a couple of years older than me, so they could go and they could buy beer, and they would do that sometimes, when we hang out, after a shift or whatever. I remember like Sam Adams was a big player, Ziegenbach and Shinerbach. Anchorstein was
yeah.
actually another one, which sadly is no longer. They went out of business a few years ago. But Anchorstein, their lager, and then they also had a Christmas beer that was really, really
Yes.
good. I remember trying that before I was actually 21 as well. But yeah, we would hang out and drink. And one time, one of the other guys I worked with, and he was quite a bit older, maybe like 25, but he had a place, and one day after shift, he invited a bunch of us over just to kind of hang out and have a little party kind of thing. And he brought out some Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, which is, yeah, a really good beer. And to me, that was probably the first ever like quote unquote hoppy beer that I ever had. Here it is right here. This is the one I brought.
Speak of the devil.
And yeah, so I think this is what really got me started into IPAs. I mean, it's not an IPA, it's just a pale ale. So a little lighter, not quite as high on ABV, not quite as hoppy. But yeah, I liked that crispness and that kind of bitterness that you get on the back end, that little bite. That to me really resonated. And so from there started kind of seeking out more of that flavor profile. At the time, I wasn't sure where to go, but there was like some, English IPAs, there was a lot of those around at the time. Bellhaven made one called Twisted Thistle that I liked a lot, which was quite a bit hoppier than this one, but really tasty. And yeah, and then like Dogfish Head, they were big back in that era. They're 60-minute, 90-minute. I didn't have the 120-minute till much later, and that's like a 12% super big boozy IPA. But yeah, I got real into those, and then kind of from there, and once I turned 21, I'd say it got kind of more into like the darker beers for a little bit, like stouts became a big thing. I definitely had Guinness too before turning 21. That was definitely something we probably had at the coffee shop,
Yep.
after a shift or something. But yeah, loved going to like the Irish pubs in town, English pubs. There's one called Bull and Bush that's an English pub on Montgomery. That was one of my favorites. Shamrock Pub was another one. Abbey Pub, I think, was another one.
I think we met at the Shamrock Pub, if I'm
Yeah,
remembering
yeah, I
correctly.
think that's
And then
correct.
we just went to Bull and Bush after Leon Bridges a couple
Oh,
last
That's
month.
right. That's right. Still there and
Still
still
there.
great. Let's see. At that point, what really kind of accelerated my beer nerdness was when Untappd became a thing, or at least
Yep.
became a thing for me. I think it had been out for maybe a couple of years, but you introduced it to me, I'm pretty sure. But that's the beer tracking, rating, drinking app, Untappd. And once I started getting into that, it was like, oh, well, he's drinking this. That sounds good. I want to try it. So then you go out and buy it, or you go to the bar that has it or whatever, so you can try it because it sounds really good.
That's 2013 for
Yeah.
us. So I don't want to quite get to that decade because before we hear John talk
Yeah.
about like
Oh, I got
your
it.
introduction,
Yeah.
kind of you take us through because I think we've gotten through for us the early 2000s,
Yeah,
like mid 2000s.
So I really took a lot of thought and sat and chewed on this for a while, but like my journey in beer was very similar to the two of you. Really lived in a household that, there really wasn't any alcohol. I mean, occasionally my dad would bring home a 6-pack of beer and that thing would sit there for months. And here's a quick story that I never shared before, but I think I was about 3 or 4 years old. And we took a road trip to Arkansas to go visit one of my aunts and uncles. And I remember standing in front of his knees and kind of slapping him on the knees. I was kind of in between his knees. And he goes, what do you say, John? And I go, my daddy says you drink too much. And so I got beat for that.
Oh no.
But I was just a little kid. And so I don't know if that played into me not really getting into any type of alcohol until I was later, into high school. Sometimes there were field parties that I'd go to and, people would be drinking, Bud Light or Bud or whatever, just out of the back of a pickup truck. But it wasn't until college that I really started to dive into beer. And if we went through that whole experience, we'd have to do a keg stand because that was really my indoctrination into beer was doing. Did you guys ever do keg stands? No.
More than I cared
Yeah,
to
I mean,
talk about.
I had done it
2 minutes.
sometimes successfully, sometimes not. But yeah, I mean, you know how it is in college. I mean, you're drinking probably some of the cheapest, crappiest beer that's out there and saying that you enjoy it. But, back in the day for me, I was at University of Georgia and we were drinking Milwaukee's Best, or, we used to call it Milwaukee's Beast. Miller Lite, PBR was a big one because I think at the time we could get it for like $1 a can or less than $1 a can. There was a place in Athens called Lowry's, and they actually had nickel night where you could get like little cups of beer for a nickel. So, and underage, I shouldn't even say this on camera, but yeah, I think Lowry's is gone, exposed, but
It's fine. No one cares.
but yeah, it used to be just a great place. And then I think the premium beer back in the day during that time was like Blue Moon.
Yeah.
Like that was probably like the best beer that I had. But I
Yeah,
would
that
say-
was on the import side of the menu.
Yeah.
That was definitely.
Yeah, and I remember, when you used to eat at like TGA Fridays or Applebee's, they used to call Sam Adams an import, like back in the day. But I don't think, I know you were stopping at like 2013. I think the 90s was when the entire United States kind of pivoted and really started getting into craft beer. I think, what is it, microbeers was what they used to call it, microbrews. And so, yeah, that was really my experience. And then when I moved in the well, it was the 2000, early 2000s, and I moved to Seattle, my whole world shifted and changed because of the beers that were up in the Pacific Northwest.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and I'll just say, like, kind of like Graham and John, that while I do have memories of my dad drinking beer, it wasn't a lot, and then there was a time where he didn't drink at all when I was a little older than that story I told. So it really didn't come back around until I got of drinking age and started drinking again, and then it was like then he would have a beer with me, and we kind of completed that rite of passage. And so I have a lot of great memories of that. Dad liked Shiner, he liked Ziegenbach for the fancier beers, but he still liked his Miller Lite too. And I actually Miller Lite grew on me eventually.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've definitely had to go to parties where it was the Dirty 30 at Keystone or Natural Light or Bud Ice, or just the cheaper beers. We had Lone Star we still do here. That was kind of a go-to if you went to a bar and you were on a budget. You could get like Lone Stars for $1, long necks. And so it was like, if I had just got paid, maybe I was getting Shiner. If I hadn't, I was probably getting Lone Star. But checking out music, like I think of Lola's, Aardvark, places in Fort Worth where I'd go, you go check out music, and music's just better with, cheap beer or any beer.
I'll still get a Lone Star at a show.
Absolutely. So, and I'll just say my one other exposure before I got into my 20s was I was in England on a kind of study abroad trip, and you just go to the pub for everything: lunch, dinner, hanging out, talking. It's a lot like a brewery. Like, families are there, you're hanging out. It's not about just the bar scene that you would think of for a normal bar. And these are family owned, operated. So that's the first time I ever saw a Guinness. And a guy that we were with, I was with mostly college age kids, but I was going into high school, and just getting to go to England. It was fun, with my mom, who was studying at Texas Wesleyan. But yeah, this one guy, he got a Guinness, and I just watched it settling on the table in front of me, and I was like, what is this? And kind of told me what it was and how you got to wait to get, it'll stop settling, it'll be perfect. So that, like, I made a note, I will have a Guinness at some point, when I'm older. And I did, and I love Guinness. But I got into Smithwick's, Harp, all the those main Irish beers. Bass too, an English beer, but a good black and tan was always good.
So we were talking earlier about Bedeau's.
Yeah, that's right.
Which I think that was the first place that I had a Guinness.
Yeah.
And a Bass,
And they pour a perfect Guinness.
yeah, they were fantastic. I was really disappointed when I found out it was a chain of restaurants. Like, I
Because your
thought,
Fido was in Atlanta.
Correct,
And ours was in Austin.
yep. Yeah, I was really disappointed. Like, I was like, I had my own little Irish pub, and then I went to another city. Actually, when I moved to Seattle, they had a Fido's downtown. So.
For a while, I think DFW Airport had a Fido, and that was the peak of the franchise. But yeah, I don't know that it's around at all anymore. And I love that place. They had great food, great Guinness and Irish everything. Guinness ice cream was always a nice thing there. Good live music. I saw a great U2 cover band there one time in Austin. But yeah, so I think that's kind of, it sounds like we had very similar first exposures to it, and then kind of the normal, like when you start to find the more craft beer that was around. But then there was really because of all those microbreweries, I think in the 90s and the early 2000s, then you start to get like the craft beer explosion all over. But like Chicago, San Diego, Denver, and like Colorado Springs, Boulder, they were all like these meccas in the Northwest, like you mentioned. That started to happen in like here. And so I think that's when, shortly after Graham and I had met and we were hanging out, we were like, hey, we love beer, we love music. And then we started getting some breweries here in Texas and locally in DFW that we could go visit. So I think RAR was probably the first brewery locally that I went to. And we've talked about RAR on previous episodes. It was a big one, a staple. Martin House also one of those earlier ones, and those really paved the way for like the Turning Point beer that we're doing this show from now. But I'll go back to you, Graham, because I know you were starting to talk about Untappd, which I got into in 2013. And ask me how I remember that it was that year, basically a year before my first child was born.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
It's always the same anniversary, like right around her birthday. Um, yeah, go ahead.
Untapped was, yeah, it was just, it made beer a game, you know, so it's
Yeah,
fun.
so-
I mean, beer was already fun. You didn't really have to make it a
like-
game
Well, now
or
you
a
compete.
contest.
I like badges and
Yeah,
achievements,
compete.
Yeah,
video games, and
exactly.
this was just like social media with
Yeah.
achievements for beer.
Yeah.
I mean, it was awesome, you know, and so definitely got me into a lot of other beers. At this point, you know, just getting into like the bourbon barrel stouts started becoming a big thing. Beer festivals, you
Yes.
know, those came on the scene. One called Untappd, but it was unrelated to the beer app. It actually had the E in the word Untappd. Where Untappd, the app drops it. There was another one, Big Texas Beer Fest.
Yeah.
Another one we went to several times, had a really good time at. But yeah, those were just a lot of fun. Dangerous, but a lot of fun. But you just get to try so many different good, delicious beers. A lot of times stuff that you might not be able to find just out in the wild. And so that was always a good time.
I think I mentioned to you guys previously that it was very fortunate that Uber was also coming up around the same time too, because those beer fests, it was like, yeah, I'm like, I think we
crazy.
even took like the TRE out there and the Dart, you know, we'd do anything
Oh, yeah.
other than drive.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it's small amounts of beer, but there's just so many of them.
so many of
And
them.
they're so strong.
Yeah.
And craft beer is just a little bit, you know, it's going to be stronger.
Well, and I haven't, you know, confirmed this scientifically, but I feel like there's something to like uh, when you're drinking varying levels of ABV beers, that somehow it like does something
Yeah,
to your system
You're
that
probably
gets you
onto
drunk
something.
faster.
And varying styles.
Yes.
Yeah, because you're bouncing from like barley wines, and I
mean,
mean,
because your body's like, oh, I gotta process this level of alcohol, and then you go to this level, and then you go, you know, you're
there's
all
something
over the
to it,
place, I
and
feel like.
it didn't help that back then I was like the higher. I didn't do it on purpose, but the
Right.
higher the ABV, the more I liked beer. So it was always the barrel aged stouts. It was always the barley wines, and those were just the ones I gravitated toward.
Yeah.
And it was, you know, best bang for your buck
Mhm.
too. But
I can't speak to the breweries here locally, but you know, you go back into the 90s and the early 2000s when this was just kind of popping up. I don't know if the ABVs were measured properly in some of those beers because there were some that would just knock you on your ass. Like it would just, you know, you'd have one or two of them and you'd just be, you know, flying high. So
yeah,
I can remember at some of those breweries, I was like, that cannot be that low. Like,
they hit different than what we were
Yeah.
used to, what you could
Mhm.
readily find available, because you had to go find that stuff. And
Yeah.
I think that was that's the point, you know, it was like they were going to make it a little bit more
Right.
because it was more special.
Yeah.
It wasn't mass
but
produced.
we also were in season as we are today.
Yeah, yeah, we were still babies.
Professionals. Yes, we were amateurs.
I was gonna share a couple of beers.
Yeah.
So these are two that when I started cutting my teeth before I moved to Seattle, I was still in Atlanta, and there was a place called Cafe Intermezzo that's still in. I think they have a couple locations now, but the original one that was in Buckhead, my buddies and I would head down there, and this was the first stout that I actually tried, which is Samuel Smith's Oatmeal Stout. If you're listening and not watching, and then this was Sam Smith's was expensive. I just remember when I had to buy a bottle of it, it was like very expensive at that restaurant. But Newcastle was kind of the beer that I used to drink. And I was very disappointed, guys, that they've changed their label. I haven't bought Newcastle in many, many years, but they used to have a different label for those of you that are old school. But this was the less expensive beer that I would drink to kind of feel like I was like Mr. Upper Echelon drinker.
And Graham knows why it's a different label. And a
Well,
different
yeah.
bottle. It used to be a clear bottle because it
Yes.
was, and it came from Newcastle, England, or
Yes.
Yeah, it was an English beer, and yeah, it looked very English, you know, the label and everything, like John said. But apparently, they got bought out by Lagunitas, which
it's
is a
good brewery.
California / Chicago based brewery, which yeah, good craft brewery. They do a lot of really great beers, but yeah, it is kind of sad that it's not the English.
I'm interested to
OG
try
beer.
it and
Yeah, I
see
want
how
to
it
see
compares.
if it
Well,
tastes the
I
same
would
because
think,
there you
well,
go.
not right this
that's
second.
definitely one that I drank quite a bit back in the early days.
Later, later, we'll get to.
I'm
But
not
no, but I'm curious. I'm curious. Because I had no idea that they got bought.
Drink.
Yeah. Well, so Untappd, I think that was probably right around the time or shortly after that Graham and I got introduced to a style that we're still big fans of to this day. So it wasn't just a phase. It feels like emo. It's not just a phase, mom.
You're living it.
Yeah.
talking about sours.
Well, sours are
Oh, okay.
one.
You're talking
Yeah,
about hazies.
yeah. I was gonna go to hazies, but
Yeah, I haven't,
sours and
yeah, I haven't hit on
kind of hazy.
sours yet.
Okay, well, we can go to sours.
Let's not skip sours.
All right, let's
Only
talk about
because,
sours.
for me, for a time, they were big for me. I mean, and I still drink them occasionally, not as much as I did, but kind of discovering some of the really good sour breweries like Jester King, which is another Texas brewery down in Dripping Springs. They do great, natural sours, and I had some of their beers. And then, we were talking about 2013, 2014 was when Collective Brewing Project,
Yes.
which is now, I mean, if you're in DFW, you probably know, but it's now Tulips, the music venue. It's a great music venue. But we loved Collective when it came into being. They did a lot of really great sours. American Sour Red was one of my favorites. Petite Golden Sour was their flagship beer and also very delicious. And they also did a Pilsner kind of towards the end of their run that was called Commercially Viable Pilsner, which is, first of all, a hilarious name, but one of the better local Pilsners that I had definitely had at that time. So just wanted to make sure we got a shout out to Collective.
And we
But
should-
we'll talk about Collective more in future
for sure.
episodes.
But we should mention the Cup of Noodles beer because
Oh,
that
Cup of
actually
Noodles, yeah.
got them national.
What is
It's like
that?
Beer Aficionado magazine.
Ramen beer.
It tasted like Cup of Noodles,
Really?
but in beer, and not in a bad way. Like
Oh,
you would
shit.
drink it and be like, I just want more Cup of Noodles. This
wow.
is really good. And maybe if you don't like
Cup of
ramen,
Noodle.
you wouldn't like it. But no, it was crazy. There's some crazy beers out there that
Pickle beers. and,
yeah, pickle or like the craziest one was probably that I had was probably Martin House's that tasted like a supreme pizza.
Pizza and ranch beer.
Mm.
Yeah, and like I just like black olive. I'm getting black olive and I don't like it.
A lot of
I don't like black olive in general.
Right.
But pizza was weird, but the cup of noodle beer was fantastic. But I
Wow.
like petite golden sour, which tie in back to Turning Point.
Yeah.
They bought the recipe from Collective and they've made some batches of it and it's been like whenever it comes out, like the scene here is like rejoices because
Right.
that was a beer that
It's great.
everyone rallied around and yeah, we love Collective and the Deos and yeah, we definitely want to talk more about them in a future episode. But yeah, you were right, Graham. That is the correct order because we definitely got into that stuff and sours and things like that before the era that we're kind of still in.
Yeah.
Which started, what was it, 2017? I think was when
Yep.
that's when it started for us. It started
Yeah.
before that in New England,
sure.
in the Boston area. You had Treehouse and Trillium making hazy IPAs and doing a fantastic job, and it just started to take the country by storm. Untappd by storm. It's this new IPA style that just is unfiltered, hazy, juicy, getting the most like tropical citrusy notes you can out of the hops and wasn't like the West Coast style IPAs, which had grown to like. I was like you, John. I like darker beers.
Right.
Guinness was like one of my flagship beers. I liked darker Belgians and Bocks, but my palate started to develop for IPAs, like what Graham was mentioning.
Barley wines. You were big into
I was
barley
big into barley wines as well. I did like malt
Yeah.
forward stuff, but I was starting to get into like Sierra Nevadas,
Mhm.
Lagunitas, some of the ones we've mentioned, IPAs. Goose Island I thought had a great IPA, still does. But yeah, like this style was not like any of the others, and for me, it was the IPA that would, if you didn't like IPAs, you would start liking IPAs because it was very different. And maybe my first hazy New England style IPA actually came from Oklahoma City, which was a lot closer than Boston. And there's a brewery in Oklahoma City called Rough Tail that makes this beer here. Everything rhymes with orange. You mentioned Blue Moon, which adds an orange slice to it.
Right.
This does not add any fruit, or you could garnish it with an orange slice if you wanted to, but just the hops that they use, they get like an orange flavor from
Yeah.
just the hops. So when I first had this, I was, Graham and I would go to Oklahoma City before it was available here in Texas to mule back, the maximum limit you could buy per person so that, we could disperse it to the people. Like 3 hours up there,
Contraband.
hang out for 3 hours, 3 hours back, 9 hour round trip, kind of hanging out in Oklahoma City, which is a great beer town now.
It
I would
is,
say, like,
yeah.
yeah, it's a quick trip from here, and they have a great scene up there. But yeah, this beer was the first one I had, but then I'll let Graham talk about this, started finding some locally
Yeah.
that was super exciting.
Yeah, at that time, I mean, like you said, it was a hazy desert, so to speak, for lack of a better term, just here in the Metroplex, kind of in Texas in general at that time, because I feel like DFW was actually the first to really start brewing some quality hazy IPAs. Um, and that started here locally with a restaurant called Malai Kitchen, it's an Asian fusion restaurant at multiple locations, but they had a brewer over there named Matt Reynolds, who is now the owner operator of Celestial Brewing out in Dallas. But he had, he was doing like a lot of their kind of flagship beers. They had like a Thai PA and some other stuff that, beers that kind of paired with the Asian, style food. And so he was brewing those, but they would also give him some liberty and give him one tap where he could kind of just do whatever he wanted to. And he was into the hazy IPAs himself. And so that was what he was trying to, experiment with and nail down. And he definitely did it. For me, I think it was just going back and looking at Untappd, like October of 2017 was when we started going there and trying to seek out, Matt's beers at Malai, and they were just really, really good, on par with, the rough tail and some of the other stuff that was coming out of the East Coast. So he was really nailing it. And then from there, you had Turning Point. They opened up in 2018, early part of 2018. And then Matt opened up Celestial towards the end,
Yeah.
the latter part of
I
2018.
remember St. Patrick's Day was Turning Point and Halloween was Celestial. So like every year, those two holidays, you can kind of have a anniversary celebration for Turning Point and Celestial respectively, which is just such a fun time and such a great way to celebrate those days where it's always a fun party, but also like, yeah, when you really get to know these guys and their beers, it's even more fun to celebrate.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll say, the beer is definitely what put them on the map. But the thing I think that keeps them going and keeps them in business is that they're fantastic people. They care about the community. They care about people, and they do more than just brew beer. I mean, they're all about bringing people together and having a good time and just doing quality business. Just being a quality business in the community and being family friendly too, which is awesome for us because I mean we all have kids. Mine are getting up in age as are John's, but boy and Sarah, his wife, they still have younger kids. So I mean, they always feel comfortable at these breweries bringing their kids to hang out, and that's a great thing because they want to have their family with them. Sometimes, I mean, not all the time. Sometimes you want to leave the kids at home, but sometimes you want to go have a good beer, and you can bring the kids and feel comfortable because it's a nice.
Our oldest
family.
daughter, the first time we took her out in public, we went to Collective.
Oh,
Yeah.
And then funny story is ended up going to kindergarten with the oldest child of the owners of that brewery, and we're now friends with them, and it's great. But it's just it's very small world.
Well, beer brings people together.
Yes,
Yeah.
DFW is a small world. The local beer scene's even smaller, but it is a community, and that's the big draw of it. You find not just like friends, but like very close, almost family with a lot of these. And I know that that's how not being a brewer, but I can just from what I've seen, I know that they feel like it's a family, all the brewers, and they want to see each other succeed. If they're like, it's not a competitive thing. In fact, you'll see they do collaborations all the time. They love that stuff. We love that stuff. As consumers. They do great events. All the anniversary parties are always a fun thing. They're like everyone shows up at each other's parties. And
One of the best ones, one of the funnest ones is a lot of the local craft brewers, and even they'll invite some from a little further out, will come and do at False Idol, which is one of the next breweries I wanted to mention because they came along a little later, but in 2020. And first of all, props to them for, opening in 2020 COVID year and surviving to this point. But there's a reason. It's because one, like I said, they're good people, good business people, know what they're doing, and they also make fantastic beers. Hazies, stouts, sours, lagers, everything they do across the board is very, very solid. But they do an event. Is it for their anniversary?
It is
Oh,
their
yeah,
anniversary,
and
yeah.
it's called it's a basketball tournament.
Yes.
Oh,
And it's hilarious, and all the local
Ridiculous
brewery
movie.
guys come and compete in this basketball tournament, and it's just complete hilarity.
And
That's great.
you can sign up a team. Like
Yeah.
we should next
should.
year do the
Yeah.
Texas
Definitely.
Tracks and
Taps.
Taps basketball team. We
Let's
might
do
need
it.
more than 3 people, but
We'll get
we'll enlist some help. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, yeah, you'll see all the breweries will have their own team. But yeah, Rough Tail from Oklahoma City, I've seen them there.
Yep.
It's such they're so unique. Great
Yeah.
sense of humor. There's usually live music too at these anniversary celebrations, and so it's like that whole music, local
And
music,
beer,
local
yeah.
beer. Yeah,
Another plug for Turning Point. I mean, I feel like I'm exploring and experimenting with new breweries with you guys that you've been to a million times probably, or have known them a lot. Turning Point's been the local brewery that I've probably been to the most. But False Idols, I think we met out there once. I've been to Community down in Dallas. I had some good beers,
Yeah.
down there as well.
They're good brewery.
And there's dozens of them just around the state that I haven't had the opportunity to either try or had time to get to. So much beer, so little time. You know how it goes.
Yeah, we also still need to some point plan the Texas Tracks and Tabs road trip, beer road trip.
Oh, geez, like
We're gonna do that. That's gonna happen.
I've
for
been
sure.
to some breweries in Houston. I just can't remember their names.
Yeah, there's some
like,
good ones down
I've been-
there.
Yeah, in Austin. I've been-
Austin's
yeah.
a lot of really good ones. And there, and every point in between, really, you can find some good.
a beer road trip, or as I call it, a road trip.
Yes,
Yeah.
just a road trip.
Because every time I go anywhere, it revolves around finding local beer.
Yep. Yeah.
Well,
The best beer and the best food. That's all we care.
Are we good on time, guys?
I think so.
So, being still newish compared to the two of you guys, I've had a lot of breweries up in the Pacific Northwest that I kind of cut my teeth on that I still love today. Obviously, I'm thousands of miles away from those breweries these days. I'm sure you're familiar with like Rogue Brewery. Deschutes is still one of my favorites. Black Butte Porter. I can't have enough of that in the fridge. It's one of my favorites. McMinimans is another one up there, and McMinimans is actually, they're not just a brewery. I mean, they do their own beer, but they've also bought up like a bunch of old schools and prisons and converted them to hotels. So it's really a great idea where you can not only drink beer, but then you can stay on site and you don't have to worry about driving. So they've done like these boutique hotels all over the Pacific Northwest. And then B2 Brewery in Salem, shout out to them as well. I've been down there a couple times. And a few episodes ago, I actually wore a hat with a school bus on it that is kind of an homage to the movie Into the Wild and the story of Chris McCandless. But I actually bought that hat at an Anchorage brewery, 49th State Brewery. So shout out to those guys up there as well. Some great brews up in the northernmost stretches of the United States. But I cut my teeth, on a lot of those breweries up in the Pacific Northwest, and I'm not mentioning a lot of local ones that were in my hood that I hit a lot.
It's a great place to start. For sure. There's so much good beer
Yeah,
out there.
great beer. But there's great beer all over the place. Like
Yeah.
as we travel the country, there's great breweries popping up, in the past decade or so everywhere.
Yeah, for sure.
We've barely touched on all the
Oh yeah,
great breweries. I mean, we could again, like when we talk about music, we could
Yeah,
go on
go
and
on.
on for hours and hours, but we'll
Yeah.
have future episodes where we'll still touch on the ones we haven't touched on. But yeah, we'd love to hear from listeners. What was, your first beer that really got you into beer? What are you enjoying now? What have we not checked out that we need to check out? We always love that interaction, music and beer wise.
Yeah.
So definitely hit us up on our socials, including Untappd. Like we're all on Untappd
Yep.
individually, but maybe we need to also.
How many beers do you have on there?
That's a good idea.
Well, we only-
I am a novice compared to
I
you.
am.
I have all the beers I've drank on there.
It's like every beer in the country he's tried.
I recently hit a milestone at 5,000, but that's a lot.
I'm at like 132.
That's 11 years and a lot of flights and tasters and festivals where you're just getting, 1 ounce of 18% beer at a time. It's fine.
Yeah.
Well, before we go, we
Alright.
doing any homework?
Yeah, we gotta give an assignment, and I'm just gonna give both of you guys an assignment, mostly because I think I've already sent you guys some stuff on this band, and I just want to make it official, so y'all actually have to like talk about. I actually have to listen to it, and I actually have to talk about it. Not a Texas band, but this is not necessarily a very Texas centric show entirely, so it's okay. We talked about some English beer, not any longer English beer, but
California beer.
originated as an English beer. Yeah, but it's a British band called Swerve Driver.
Okay.
They came around kind of late 80s, early 90s. Their heyday, that was probably like around 93, 94. Definitely what you would call shoegaze, noisy, guitar driven, just alternative rock. And I love them. My older brother was who introduced me to them. He was a huge fan. Since then, I was actually hung out with the band because my brother himself was in a band, which I think we've talked about a little bit, but he toured over in Europe and got to hang out with the guys. But Mescal Head, I think, is their magnus opum, so to speak. And so I would start there for sure. Before that, Raise is also really, really good. They're still putting out records now, and actually the most recent one I would recommend as well. I mean, they're still making good music, but yeah, I think one of the most underrated bands probably of the 90s. One of the things I did send y'all, and I think y'all already checked out, was Rick Beato has interviewed Adam Franklin, the lead singer and guitarist from the band. He's interviewed him a couple of times now. And he's a big fan. So, if Rick's a fan, it's probably, pretty good stuff.
Big fan of Rick Beato.
Yeah. So
Love his stuff.
check it out. Let me know what you guys think. I think you'll dig it once you really dive into it.
Swerve Driver. Yep.
Swerve Driver. And don't, Swerve Driver, we will not be swerve driving tonight. We will drive responsibly. Drink
Yes.
responsibly.
Don't drink and drive.
Don't drink and drive ever. All right. We good? That's
I think
it.
so. Man.
Until next time, for Tracks and Taps, we'll see you on the flip side.
See ya.
Cheers.